We've talked about the Blue Jackets' best case scenario next season, but what is their worst case scenario? Is it missing the playoffs? Is it being a lottery team again? Is it a secret third option? We're going to discuss on today's Locked on Blue Jackets.
You're Locked on Blue Jackets, your daily podcast on the Columbus Blue Jackets, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to Locked on Blue Jackets, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day. I am, as always, your host, Jay Foster, here to give you the good, the bad, and the ugly about your favorite team and mine, the Columbus Blue Jackets. I've also got to let you know that this episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money and use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. I just want to thank you for making this your first listen of the day every single day. Locked on Blue Jackets is free and available on podcast platforms and over on YouTube. So, like I said, earlier this week, we talked about what the best case scenario for this team is, and we kind of came to the conclusion that, making the playoffs will be great, winning a round even better. That might be best case scenario for this roster as currently constructed, right? So I wanted to talk about, okay, no one likes to talk about it, but what is the worst case scenario for this roster, right? Is worst case scenario to be a lottery team again? Is the worst case scenario to just kind of be average and again miss the playoffs by 5 to 10 points? Is worst case scenario somewhere in between that? Is worst case scenario, I'm gonna knock on wood here, a key injury to an important piece? So there's a bunch of different options here, and so we're gonna talk about probably most of them, at least some of them. So I want to talk about at first just kind of what the actual worst case scenario is for this team. And honestly, this is kind of a weird year, right? Of when the Blue Jackets were miserably bad a couple of years ago and they were in the running for Bedard for basically the entire season. We were like, well, if there was a season to suck, this is the one, right? Obviously, they didn't end up getting Bedard. The draft lottery ended up meaning that they picked third, got Adam Fantilli. Obviously thrilled with that, right? I'm not sitting here saying that this team's organization or lookout would be markedly better if they had won the lottery and picked Bedard, right? I'm not saying that Fantilli is better than Bedard. I'm not saying that Bedard is better than Fantilli, but I think the way that this roster is constructed, I think the coach that they have, the GM that they have right now, et cetera, Fantilli is a perfect fit for this organization in a way that Connor Bedard might not be, right? Similar-ish look at the upcoming draft. Obviously everyone is losing their mind about Gavin McKenna, and rightly so. The kid is really, really good, right? But I do think that there was similar hype around Bedard, and he obviously turned out to be not quite as, generational as people thought he was going to be, right? I think a lot of people were like, this is the next Sidney Crosby, this is the next Nate McKinnon, this is the next Connor McDavid, blah, 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 right? And Bedard hasn't really turned into any of those yet, which is fair. He isn't even 20 yet, I don't think, or is just turned 20. It's a whole thing. There's still time, but I think a lot of people are expecting McKenna to be even better than Bedard, better than Celebrini, better than basically any pick since at least Nathan McKinnon in terms of first overall, right? If there was a year to be unexpectedly bad, this is a pretty good one. However, taking a step backwards right now, while not the worst thing in the world, but you go from drafting fourth overall and picking Caden Lindstrom, then to a season where you just miss out on the playoffs by 1.5 wins, to then going right back to being in the mix for 1 to 3rd overall. It just feels like that's the kind of step back that this organization doesn't need and not can't handle necessarily, right? But it does feel like you take 1 step forward and 2 steps back with this team, right? It's if you get McKenna, great. There's some very reasonable, 2nd, 3rd, 4th range picks in terms of prospects that are probably going to go then. But for me, it feels like being that bad again is just kind of Like, God, do we have to do this again? Really? You know? I don't know that I have it in me to watch another miserably bad season. You know, and the fact of the matter is, again, barring everyone on the team falling apart and being, having career worst seasons and, like losing Fantilli to an injury early, losing Werenski to an injury early. I'm going to knock on wood here. But like, barring all of that happening, I don't think this team is going to be bad enough to be in the mix for the lottery. So is this team's worst case scenario being a, let's say, 8 to 12 pick? I think, or even let's go further, 8 to 16, right? Because for me, it kind of feels a little bit like the worst case scenario would be just missing out on the playoffs again. Like, I think that would suck more than drafting first overall, right? It's obviously this organization doesn't want to be in the position where they're drafting first overall. But after falling just short last season, after, improving the roster a little bit, not as much as people wanted maybe, but improving the roster, is the worst case scenario for the team as constructed being another mushy middle team or a team that, is not good enough to make the playoffs, but also not good enough to get a high draft pick? Is that worse than being in the running for winning the draft lottery? And I spend a bunch of time debating between these two things because, like, obviously your knee-jerk reaction is the lower down the standings you are, the worse your season is, right? And the Blue Jackets they're not out of the rebuild territory yet, but they are in a position where they want to be taking steps forward, right? I don't think it's helpful to take steps backwards at the minute, especially not huge steps like, going from being this close to being a playoff team to being a contender for the worst in the league, right? Like, you're going to have to battle with the Sharks, for example, to be the worst in the league. You're going to have to out tank the Penguins. Like, it's going to be tough and it's going to suck. And that to me feels worse than trying and falling just short. Now, I know that the reward for being the worst team in the league, and you're not even guaranteed to win the lottery for being the worst team in the league, right? Like, the Blackhawks moved up in the draft a couple of years ago. The Islanders moved up from 11th overall to first overall. Being the worst team in the league is not a guarantee that you're going to get that first overall draft pick, right? So the worst case scenario to me really feels like you are the worst team in the league and you end up moving potentially to third overall, right? And now drafting third overall, not the end of the world, but it really, really feels like the Blue Jackets should be finishing up their building process, right? Like, they're building up their what's the word I want? They should be done stocking up, right? They have the pieces they need. Now they just have to put them together in the right combination. They have to, they have this is gonna be a really stupid metaphor. They have all of the Pokemon they want to win the league, to beat the Elite Four. Now they just have to make sure that all of them level up and all of them evolve, right? And I'm truly so sorry for that really stupid metaphor, but it's true, right? Like, you want your Fantilli to evolve to its final form. You want your Marchenko to evolve to its final form. Does Zach Werenski have another evolution in him? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? You have to evolve the pieces that you have instead of going all the way right back to the start and asking Professor Oak, can I please have just one more Pokemon? I'm sure this one will be the one, right? I'm not going to sit here and say that adding Gavin McKenna to the prospect pool would not be incredible, but at a certain point, you have to move out of that mindset, right? You have to be in the mindset of, you have all of the right pieces, take steps forward. So for me, personally, being a lottery team would be a much worse case scenario than just missing the playoffs. Because to me, if you just miss the playoffs, at very worst, you're standing still, right? And standing still for a rebuilding team, not the worst thing in the world. So let's take another quick break, or take the first quick break, actually. And then when we get back, what we'll do is I want to talk about some of the things that could go wrong. Because again, similarly to how a lot of things have to go right for the Blue Jackets to win a playoff round or two, A lot of things are going to have to go wrong for this team to fall all the way back down into lottery contention. And I'm not saying it's not going to happen, but it's very unlikely, knock on wood, that all of these things are going to happen, right? So let's take a quick break, and then when we get back, we'll discuss that on Locked On Blue Jackets. First, I'm going to tell you about Monarch Money because I don't know about you, I can't name all my financial accounts, what they're worth, whether it's 401ks, properties, investments. I got no idea, right? When you don't have the full picture, you can end up leaving money on the table like I did. That's why there's Monarch Money, an all-in-one personal finance tool that brings your entire financial life together in one clean, easy-to-use interface on your laptop or on your phone. And it's built for people with busy lives. If you've put off organizing your finances, Monarch is for you. It does all the heavy lifting for you, link all your accounted minutes, see clear data visuals, get smart categorization of your spending. You can finally feel in control of your money without ever touching a spreadsheet. Like, I don't know about you, I got so tired of looking at my bank account, and then having to go to a budgeting app and then to a spreadsheet and then back to my banking app and having to juggle like a million different things. I don't need to do that anymore. Monarch Money has everything in one place for you, keeping a clear view of your financial health week to week and even long term. Don't let financial opportunities slip through the cracks. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com in your browser for 50% off your first year. That's 50% off your first year at monarchmoney.com with code LOCKEDONNHL. Welcome back to Locked On Blue Jackets. So we've kind of decided that worst case scenario is being a lottery team, right? Despite the fact that having Gavin McKenna on the team would be great, we know that the universe doesn't work like that, right? There's no guarantee that being the worst team in the league means that the Blue Jackets are going to get Gavin McKenna. What it likely means is that they'll move down to third overall and pick a fine prospect that is not a game breaker, right? And that's, again, the Blue Jackets don't need another game breaker. I mean, it'd be nice to have, and I think okay, that's unfair. You can always use another game breaker, right? But I don't think the Blue Jackets' rebuild success is dependent on them picking up a guy like Gavin McKenna, right? So I think that being a lottery team is infinitely worse than being a team that just misses out on the playoffs. Arguably, the worst case scenario is being a team that picks like 8 to 12. So like you're not really in lottery range, but also you don't get that pseudo satisfaction of being a team that like. I feel like I spent a lot of this summer being like, man, we got so close. We got so close. And there's a kind of not joy in that necessarily, but there's a kind of satisfaction in like, if just this one thing had gone right, I swear they would have been a playoff team, right? And so being a team that, falls, 10 points out of playoff contention, that's kind of worst case scenario. Or worse than just, again, being a team that finishes, 17th in the league and, 2 points out of a playoff spot again. That would suck. Not the end of the world. Standing still is not terrible. What is terrible is taking all the progress that you had last year and just getting rid of it, right? Because here's the thing. Like yesterday's episode where I talked about all of the ways that this team can succeed, Fantilli taking steps forward, Kent Johnson taking steps forward, Marchenko taking steps forward, Voronkov taking steps forward, etc., right? All these young players taking steps forward. What if they don't do that? What if they get hit with another slump? What if they take, what if it really was a flash in a pan season last year? What if they overachieved? They get hit hard with regression and the young players improving is not good enough to make up for that regression, right? Like, I don't think that's likely. I think that they have enough good young players and the players are good enough that they can overtake that regression. But there's a world where you get like first half of the season Adam Fantilli as opposed to second half of the season Adam Fantilli, right? And he scores I think he was on pace for 14 goals or something. By at the end of the first half of the season, right? You want 30 to 35 goals for Adam Fantilli, not 14. There's a world where the new additions don't gel. Charlie Coyle comes in and is awful. Miles Wood is a liability. Isaac Lundestrom doesn't gel. Like, there's a world where Zach Werenski kind of comes back down to earth a little bit and is not the Norris caliber defenseman that he was last season. There's a world where Sean Monahan can't stay healthy and, is not that offense driving 1C that this team had for the first time in a billion years, right? Like, all of these things can go wrong. There's a world where the defense just kind of crumbles, like Dante Fabro was a flash in the pan. There's a world where now that he's made his money, Ivan Provorov stops giving a damn and is just god-awful this season. There's a Denton Matejchuk sophomore slump. There's, there's all of these different things that can go wrong. And the thing is, like I kind of talked about in yesterday's episode, lots of these things probably will not go wrong. Some of them probably will, but the likelihood of everything going wrong all at once, knock on wood, is extremely unlikely. There's a couple of things that I'm kind of more worried about than not. Some of the things that I'm worried about, Sean Monahan's health worries me a little bit. I think that something else that worries me is, what does this team do with their wingers? They still feel very thin. They have a bunch of middle six guys, and I don't know that they have a bunch of top six guys at the wing. They've got Marchenko, they've got Johnson, maybe Voronkov, if he figures out his conditioning. They've got at least half a season of Voronkov, right? What did they do with Igor Chinikov? Sounds like he's in town for training camp. Sounds like he looks good. I think Aaron Porcelain mentioned the other day that, there's a chance that they can get Chinikov and Everson in the same room and they can kind of hash it out. And I think that's great news if they can fix it, because if they can fix it and Chinikov can stay healthy, there's a top six winger, right? Again, lots of moving parts, but the fact that, the lack of top six wingers or clear-cut top six wingers worries me a little bit. I think Dmitry Voronkov is a potential guy, but he's run out of steam 2 seasons. Is this offseason of training going to be anything different? I think the defense worries me. Again, I talked about in yesterday's episode that if you once you get beyond Zach Werenski, you got basically nothing from the defense in an offensive way of thinking last season, right? Zach Werenski had 82 points, and I think second on the defense in scoring was Ivan Provorov, who had 33, right? So that's a 50-point difference in offense from your blue line. If you get, if Zach Werenski comes down to earth even a little bit, and you get 50 points from Zach Werenski instead of 80, that's 30 points that you got to make up somewhere else, right? I think the fact that, the Ivan Provorov contract worries me. He was, in fairness to him, he was good last season. I liked him last season. If he can keep up or even take another step forward from that last season, then I think, the defense will be mostly okay. I just don't have a lot of confidence in him continuing that level of play. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe he'll prove me wrong, but I feel like we've seen this before, right? Of guys in contract years that try, get paid, and then are just kind of like, well, I'm not going to try as hard anymore. Maybe that's uncharitable of me. Maybe that's incorrect. Maybe that's confirmation bias. But I think that's something that worries me. I think the biggest worry, or the biggest question mark, and I feel like you guys all know what I'm going to say here: goaltending. If the Blue Jackets get another season of 50 to 60 games of a subpar Elvis, this team is going to be dead in the water. This team is going to regress in terms of goal scoring. I think they're going to score fewer goals this season than they did last season. They need to make that up with goaltending. And if you get the Elvis of last season, of these wild swings from, allowing 2 or fewer goals to allowing 6 or more goals to, being in and out of the lineup, if Jet Greaves isn't the guy, this team is going to be dead in the water by Thanksgiving, right? We're talking Canadian Thanksgiving, not even American Thanksgiving. It's going to be tough. That's the biggest question to me, because I think it's the biggest change. I think, or the biggest potential change, let's say, because, there's 2 options here, right? Well, technically there's 3 options, but, option 1 is Elvis as your starter. Option 2 is Jet as your starter. Option 3 is they kind of go back and forth. You need your starting goalie to be good. And I think that there are question marks for Elvis being a starting caliber goalie. I think there are question marks for Jet being a starting caliber goalie. I think he has potential, but again, he's played, 25 NHL games at this point in his career, and you're going to throw him into the starting role. It could be fine. You could get a repeat of last season, or it could be just terrible, right? It could be miserable to watch. He could regress in a big way. I think it's unlikely, but if both Elvis and Jet aren't getting it done, what are your options, right? You don't have a third NHL caliber goalie. You don't have a kid waiting in the wings, right? Like your AHL right now is Zach Sorchenko and Nolan Lalonde. Those are your AHL goalies. Either of those are going to get time in the NHL this season, then something's gone really, really wrong. Knock on wood. I feel like I spent all week. I feel like I've spent the last 2 weeks knocking on wood about all of these terrible things that I'm speaking into existence. But like, if one of your goalies goes down, God forbid both of your goalies go down. Like, remember that season that Bobrovsky went down, and then Curtis McElhinney went down, and you had to run with Jonas Korpisalo, a very young Jonas Korpisalo, and Anton Forsberg for like a good chunk of the season. Like, there was a couple of seasons ago where you had to roll with JF goddamn Berube for like 6 games in a row because every other goalie was injured. You know, lots of things can go wrong. The Blue Jackets don't have the organizational stability at goaltending outside of their prospect system. I think they have a lot of very promising prospects, but Ivanov's in Russia. Andrianov's in Russia. They're also children. You know, Andrianov is 18 years old. Ivanov, I think, is 21 years old. Gardner's in North America, but he's 19 years old. Melvin Strahl, 22 years old. Not the answer, right? If goaltending goes down, they are going to have to do something about it, and that's not a trade that they're going to win, right? That's going to be God, we need a goalie. Who has a goalie? What do we give up, right? And that's when things start getting dangerous, is when you are in desperate need of a goalie and every other team in the league knows, then you're kind of just stuck paying whatever the team with the goalie wants, right? And that's Don Waddell has not super impressed me with his trade history for the Blue Jackets so far. You know, there have been some that have been fine, but for the most part, like, again, in hindsight, the Patrick Laine trade wasn't great. I liked it at the time, or didn't dislike it at the time. I thought the Charlie Coyle trade was weak. The Luke Cunnin trade was basically a non-event, right? Like, there's some that have been good, some that have been bad. Lots going on. None of it out of this world good. And I don't know that I have faith in him because, as we've talked about before, for better or worse, Don Waddell is not a fast mover. And if they have to hurriedly pull off a mid-season goalie trade, I don't think he's going to win that for a variety of reasons. Right? But the dream, obviously, is that Jet Greaves wins the Vesta this season. If you don't get league average goaltending out of at least one of your goalies, then this team is going to be dead in the water because you can't win every game 8-7, as we've seen last season. And also, what happens if your offense just completely dries up again, like it did in March this year, right? Of friggin' 6 shutouts in the month of March, or whatever insane stat it was. That, to me, is going to be, again, we talked about this in the best case scenario, right? For the best case scenario, you need to get good goaltending. The worst case scenario will see you at the bottom of the league. And again, like, it's not just going to be goaltending, but a combination of goaltending plus other players not taking steps forward, plus regression hitting you like a train. And you're going to see this team drafting 4th, 5th overall. And that's kind of the nightmare scenario, right? I'm not going to sit here and say that this season is a failure if they don't make the playoffs, because I don't think that development is linear. You know, I'm not going to sit here and say that this season is a failure if they don't end up with more than 89 points, and if they don't get a playoff spot, then this season is not a failure if they don't get a playoff spot. But they have to show improvement in a bunch of areas, and if they don't do that, then they're just going to end up sliding down the standings. I think a lot of teams got better this offseason, you know, teams that they're going to have to compete with, and that's that's going to be tough if if this team starts to slide in the standings because of the goaltending, because they can't figure out the offense, because of, one of the 17 reasons that I've kind of listed in this episode. That being said, I am, and maybe this is me being stupid and optimistic, I feel more predisposed to best case scenario than worst case scenario, right? I think more has to go wrong for them to hit worst case scenario than has to go right for them to hit best case scenario, if that makes sense. I think that there are roughly the same amount of pieces, but I think more of the pieces are kind of locked into place for the best case scenario. So, for example, the young players getting better is a big piece. That feels more likely to me than Adam Fantilli falling off a cliff and scoring, 10 goals next season, or all of your young players failing to take steps forward. I feel like is way less likely than all of your young players taking steps forward. So I feel more inclined to say that best case scenario is more likely. However, as we all know, this is the Columbus Blue Jackets. I am cursed. This team is cursed. We're going to talk about the injury curse in tomorrow's episode because one of the prospects has already been hit with it and he hasn't even been in Columbus yet. So we're going to talk about that in tomorrow's episode. But personally speaking, I think this team is going to be closer to best case scenario than worst case scenario. That's just me. Maybe you guys think different. Thanks for listening to this episode, making it your first listen of the day every single day. Locked On Blue Jackets is free and available on all podcast platforms and over on YouTube. I have been Jay Foster. You can find me on Twitter at _Jacob Foster, JAKOBFORSTER. You can find the show at LO_Blue Jackets on Twitter. You can find them at LO-Blue Jackets on Blue Sky. You can find me if you want to send me an email, comments, questions, criticisms, effusive praise. LockedOnBlueJackets@gmail.com is the place to go for that. Tomorrow, we're going to be talking about the prospect tournament roster that got released today. And we are going to be talking about Luca Morelli's injury and what that means, A, for the prospect tournament, and B, for the Monsters, because he was figuring to be a not insignificant part of the Monsters blue line this season. He's out till December. We'll discuss that on tomorrow's episode. Thank you once again for listening. And until tomorrow, make sure you stay locked on.